Good morning, and thank you for being here. I am Sarah Michael. I'm from the University of Colorado, and I am the past chair of the SAEM Education Research Interest Group, which is one of the sponsors of this program, along with the CDEM clerkship directors in emergency medicine. We try to host this session every couple of years, at least, mostly to give people who are interested in education research like you an opportunity to engage with editors in our field, have an opportunity to ask questions, and get some of your challenges addressed in a group setting like this. So we have no conflicts of interest. These are the learning objectives for our session today. We're going to talk about some best practices, help you think about journal selection when you're preparing your work, and then discuss some up-and-coming new trends that we foresee in medical education research. We are super lucky today to have Dr. Promise and Dr. Latpipur here to talk about their journals, and they're going to give some overviews of AEM, ENT, and WestGem briefly for you, and then we'll continue on to the best practices and have an opportunity to answer your specific questions. Who would like to go first?
Looks like I'm on. Good morning, everyone. So I'm the editor-in-chief of Academic Emergency Medicine Education and Training. I think one of the things that you will notice with our journal during this past year is we went to continuous publication with our goal of getting information out, cutting-edge educational research to the end user as quickly as possible. That means, however, that we don't have really an issue. So we went to continuous publication earlier this year, and with that, we take 2 months worth of work, and then we say an issue is closed. So if you look on the website for Wiley, it'll look as if there's, quote, an issue, but it really is all the papers as they just kind of flowed through. So that is something kind of new for us, and I think something that the membership has liked, because you get a PubMed ID earlier, before you might have to wait until an issue published when that came out. So that is new for us. The other thing that I draw your attention to with our journal is the different types of manuscript submissions, and we'll talk about that probably a little bit later, but not all of it is around having actual kind of research data. It can be innovations, it could be talking about new kind of paradigms or ways to think about medical education. So I think it gives people an opportunity to publish in ways that are not considered, traditional research. We did a session here on Tuesday with we picked 10 articles that we, the editorial board, thought were interesting and intriguing, and it was very amazing to me how people came up and goes, oh, I didn't realize you could publish like that. So I encourage people, for no matter what journal you're interested in, to really see what that journal has to offer, what innovative ways you might get your scholarship out. I think the next thing on the line for us is to get an impact factor. We're on that journey. I would anticipate, if all goes well, we'll have an impact factor probably within 2 years. It just takes a while to get there. We're in Web of Science now. As I said, you can search us through PubMed to get what you want, but impact factor is what a lot of people look at. We do have a site score, which is pretty reasonable for our journal, but most people know impact factor, so that's coming down the line for us.
Thanks. I realize we don't need the speaker. They wanted us to do it so they could record it. So anyway, I'm Shahram Latpipur with the Western Journal of Emergency Medicine at UC Irvine. Been involved with WestGem for about 15 years. So we're a little bit of a freestanding journal, so it kind of developed out of California, out of the California programs, supported by our Department of Emergency Medicine, UC Irvine initially, but now it's pretty ubiquitous, editors from all over the world that work hard, at reviewers from everywhere. What makes WestGem a little different than most is, first and foremost, because it's supported by kind of a community, a village. So, everybody's pretty accessible. We're all the editors, all their email addresses, all our contacts are online, so feel free to reach out to us. If you have questions about things, we will try to answer them as best we can. Dr. Langdorf is our editor-in-chief. He's been involved with us throughout the advances in our journal. We are fortunate to have an impact factor. We got it about 2-3 years ago, and we're one of the higher-ranked journals in the world, and it's important to keep working on that, both as a society and for emergency medicine. Our impact factor is 2.7 for 5 years and 2.4 for 2 years. We're one of the highest-ranked open access journals in the world, 4 out of about 24 internationally. So open access, I think, is a good thing if you know a little bit about it, but in case you don't, it means you retain your own copyright to your articles, to your you basically only give us permission to publish your work, so you retain the copyright. There's a cost to that, since we don't sell the subscriptions to anyone, the access, because it's open access. So there's a cost, which is an article processing fee. We have both a regular issue that accepts education articles from you, and similar to Dr. Promise, we accept both educational advances, brief research articles, and we also have a special education issue that's supported by SAEM and CORD. So SAEM and CORD basically pay us for that issue, and they waive your article processing fee. So there's never a fee to submit, but for accepted articles, there is a fee if you're not part of the special education issue. And how we've taken care of that is we encourage departments to become a department subscriber to us, and then that fee gets waived too. So, being open access, I think it helps both our society and helps our journal. We've had over 20 million views through both PubMed, our journal website, and eScholarship, which is the UC website. It keeps going up, which is great. It means people are looking at it, people are coming to it. We had 3.3+ million last year. It's actually pretty hard to keep track of all the views because the data is hard to come by. Our acceptance rates, we're happy with it, around 30%. I know some journals are harder. We think that's a reasonable rate. We don't want to be in the teens or lower. We want to be something that makes it reasonable for most people to get accepted. Our education issue is with Doug Ander from SAEM, Emory, and he's been doing it for 7 years with us, and Dr. Love for CORD, and he's been doing it from George Washington for 7 years with us. Again, they are about the same too. About a third of the articles submitted to us are accepted. There's now, the call is open for this coming year, so you can submit for the next couple of months to us, and you'll hear on a rolling basis if it's accepted. Soon as it's accepted, it goes online, similar to AEM Education and Training, and then we collate it together at the end of this year into a special issue. We do send it to PubMed. We've started about a year ago batching these things, so I think the minimum is 10 articles we have to send to PubMed, so it gets PubMed indexed. So we do that for any of our articles. As long as we have a small batch, we send it even before the issue, so it shows up on PubMed. Our regular article processing fee is $1,000, but again, we ask for departments for only $800 to become a department subscriber, less than the $1,000, they get up to 3 papers waived. Our goal is for most of the departments to be department subscribers. We have about 80, so about a third or so of the departments in the country, approximately, are subscribers. And if the other ones want to become one, it's pretty easy to become one. And that's it for me.
Do you have any other data that you wanted to discuss, Dr. Promise?
I think it's probably helpful to, as you're thinking of where to submit manuscripts, obviously you want to find a journal where things align well. AEM ENT does not charge a fee, although it's included in your membership in SAEM. We also, as mentioned, kind of publish continuously. I think it's really just finding a journal that's a good fit. AEM ENT is all about education and training. That's all we publish. If it's a manuscript that comes to us that is more clinically oriented, we kind of push it over and suggest that people apply, send that manuscript to AEM. We also have a special issue. Our issue is proceedings from this meeting. So anything related to education around this will go in a special thing. So we may have committees that report out from SAM or task force that worked on something that the board asked them to do, and they're able to submit, similar to white paper, we call it a concept paper, so that information can get disseminated within the organization.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to review some of our, beating a dead horse, the topics that we always seem to talk about and that always seem to come up at this meeting in terms of best practices when you're thinking about or conceptualizing your medical education research or are in the process of submitting it. The first is to do a really good job and be overly explicit about why your paper matters and why it's important. It's your baby, of course it's important to you. You love it, you get it, but the reviewers don't always get it, and it's super frustrating. So make sure you're really clear about your hypothesis or the goal of the work that you're doing and how you envision building on it in the future and why it's going to make an impact and why other people should care or replicate it or use it at their institution or whatever it is, and just be super, super explicit about that, because oftentimes we feel like our work is obvious to us, but it's not obvious to everybody else. Before you design your project, do the literature review on the front end. I know a lot of us are engaged in education-related work, and someone says to us, "Did you think about publishing that?" And you're like, "No, I didn't." And then on the back end, you're trying to apply literature to do the background part to work that's already done. And it's hard to make everything fit together just so, and to apply conceptual frameworks like mastery learning or cognitive load theory or Miller's pyramid, Kirkpatrick's model. All of those things fit much better on the front end than the back end. And it's often clear to reviewers that you are just citing some things to cite some things in the background rather than having true expertise about a particular topic. To that end, really important to plan with scientific rigor in mind on the front end. One thing that we've heard from reviewers and editors is that the simple pre-post test design is not super desirable. It's extremely common, but it's really hard to control for because of the effect of time and other confounding variables. And it's a little bit difficult to draw a true conclusion about the effect of your educational intervention with that simple design. There are other designs that you can utilize relatively easily, though they are more work if you get a methodologist or a statistician involved earlier. I say that, right, but it's okay, so who's going to pay for the statistician, right? We have these conversations all the time and make it sound like it's super easy. It's not always easy. There are lots of challenges. Some departments have statistical support on the front end. If yours is a department where that's a harder resource to come by, do things like your literature review and reach out to the author at another institution and say, I'm doing a paper that's similar to yours, but I'm looking at X. I wondered if you would have some time to meet with me and discuss some of your methods and the advantages and disadvantages of the design that you used, and try to get some robust help with the design phase early. Similarly, design surveys so that they measure what you hope they measure. Survey methodologists will make a huge improvement in your ability to draw valid and reliable conclusions from your surveys. Similarly, assessment tools, if you can use validated ones, are the way to go rather than inventing your own. If you must design your own, you should describe why you think they are valid and reliable and not leave it to the reviewers to point out that you did or didn't do that. And then when you're doing curricula-related design research, make sure that the objectives and the outcomes that you're measuring are related to the curriculum that you designed. Have those things tightly linked together so that you can be thoughtful about measuring the effects. We say this all the time, and it's harder than it sounds, but multi-institution research is much more impactful and generalizable than a small n at a single institution. There are multiple opportunities by which you can do this. Has anyone else in this room besides Nick heard about the SAEM Collaborator Connection? So this is a website, and I've got the QR code at the end of the talk. And if you go on this website, you can put in who you are, what your interests are, the kind of project that you're interested in doing, and then see if there are other members of SAEM who are interested in collaborating with you to do another site for your project. If you feel like you're just interested in getting involved and you don't really know what you want to do, you can also go there and see what sort of things other people are working on and be like, hey, that sounds really interesting. I would love to be the site PI for a different site of that project. So it's one way to try to leverage some collaboration from this community. Obviously, you have other specialty groups that you're engaged with. We think about like the CORD program, the Merkit CORD program, if you're interested in additional training opportunities, CDEM, your specialty niche societies like wilderness or ultrasound are also good opportunities for collaboration. And then there is the SAEM Armed Med Ed new research training program, which is another way to get engaged, get some additional research related skills and meet potential collaborators. So I have links to all of those at the end of this presentation as well. It's super important to engage in peer review. Publications are a conversation, right? We are putting our work out for our peers to read and respond to. They write letters back, they engage, they point things out, right? And that's an ongoing iterative process. And being a peer reviewer actually makes you a member of that conversation and community. It also makes you a better writer and gives you a critical eye for what to look for in papers, and that critical eye will make you more likely to be successful as an author as well. If you're not comfortable reviewing because you don't feel like it's something that you have expertise or experience in, then sign up for mentored reviews. Both journals here offer mentored reviews, so you can work with an experienced reviewer to get feedback on your review, and then you can review as a team if that's a little bit less intimidating for you. When we met to talk about this session, there were a few things that came up as particularly exciting as we look forward. Diversity, equity, and inclusion continue to be a major issue in medicine in general and emergency medicine. We feel in particular because it's so important to us and the way that our specialty is positioned in medicine. We think that competency-based medical education will continue to be really impactful, and I personally would like to see us kind of catch up to Canada, and I think we can, but that's certainly something that is coming quickly. And then I think about the utilization of novel technology in education, science, things like AI and machine learning and big data from our EMR that we've only begun to scratch the surface of in terms of its ability to contribute to our knowledge of medical education. So now we will transition to your questions and see if there's anything that's been an issue for you or ideas or thoughts that you have for the editors. And if you can, please use a microphone so that we can record all of this.
Hi, thank you for your talk. So I know we all know that multi-institutional research projects are, mostly favored over single institution, but what would you say are some things that make single institution research kind of stand out and have a better chance of being accepted or published?
All right, so I think it all comes down to the design, your study design. So I think, you can definitely have a single institution study design, but it can't be just a pre-post. So you need to have a good control group. The people can serve as their own controls, so then you can have a crossover design and then come back. So I think definitely it does not have to be multi-institution, but if it's a single institution, then you need to be able to, address the limitations of your study as best as you can. And that would be not everything has to be multi, sometimes by doing more years, more individuals, more different, getting your sample size a little better. But it's really trying to address, the people being their own, control groups.
Yeah, I think the other thing is, when people come up with great ideas, they think it's just so novel. Make sure it really is novel. It kind of goes back to, doing the lit search. It's really important to kind of set the context or set a conceptual framework for why you're setting out to do that study. So really the background and the nuts and bolts of the study design, as you just heard, I think are key. Yes, we all like to see studies that are done at multiple sites to say there isn't like some special bias because of where it was, but we know that that's not always, possible. So it's just like any type of good research, put your homework into the design, do your homework with your background, and educational research is different, right? People don't understand always, setting the stage with a conceptual framework. When you do an assessment, making sure you have reliability and validity evidence. Like some people don't even know what that is. They just design a survey and say, I'm going to send it out to people. There's a science behind that. And I think learning and understanding that's important if you want to publish in the educational research realm.
I think as Dr. Promise mentions that I think really the background, which is the hardest thing, is looking at the literature. If you find good studies, stuff that potentially you want to mimic, I'd encourage you to reach out to them. We're a small enough community that people will be happy to tell you. We were talking about this with Sarah yesterday. They'd be happy to tell you all the things you shouldn't do when you're trying to either replicate them or do it better. Or we're always interested. I think everybody's always interested if somebody's trying to learn from us that they do it better. So I think people would be happy to give you recommendations on how to potentially match either their study design or what you're trying to build on, kind of to go to the next level.
Yeah, another thing that just came to mind as we're talking about this is, if you're interested in doing a study, sometimes it's helpful to look at literature in other specialties and duplicate that study that got published in emergency medicine. It's like, oh, wow. And then you meet friends. The other group of people to connect with is if you're at a university setting or affiliated with a university setting, to meet the people in the Department of Education or School of Education, and In the College of Medicine, there's typically people that are PhDs, that their job is like assessment, curriculum development. Become their friends. I will tell you, the way I have been successful in my career, I really owe it to the partnerships I've had with people at amazing places. You know, I was at Duke, I worked with people. I was at University of California, San Francisco, and worked with people. That really helped blossom my career. And to this day, you know, I still reach out to those individuals and get their ideas on stuff. So if you have that opportunity, take advantage of it. They're amazing resources for you.
One of the things that I struggle with is every college of medicine has a slightly different curriculum, but they might be doing similar things. So one of the projects that I was really trying to work on that kind of never got where I wanted it was the idea of a feed-forward letter from medical schools to residencies. And the University of Michigan did this really well, and they published a couple of papers on it, but when I would try to collaborate with them, their fourth year of medical school was way different than ours. And I felt like there were barriers there that we just never could reconcile. And in the same way, you know, there's a lot of like educational innovations or curricular developments that you might have that you would want to collaborate with, but are those things that you should just try to ignore and still do the multi-site study? Or what's your advice in trying to compare two things at two different institutions that are kind of inherently different? I don't know if that's a great question. But.
So I think I understand your question. You're interested in doing a multi-site study. But as you start to develop that study and work on collaborations, you recognize that in reality, each medical school is different in how they implement things. So that also is the reality of the world, right? So if you want to make a recommendation that you're going to do a forward-facing letter to transition the handoff between medical school and residency, you call that out. You know, every place is different, but what we can all agree on are these things. This is, you know, the information we're going to feed forward. And then there's maybe a section about what's unique about our institution and what makes it different. I think you just have to be real. The key is make sure you call it out so people recognize that you understand it. You give the rationale of how you think it will impact the study. Maybe you put that as future research, you know, does it make a difference from those kinds of things? That would be my recommendation. Yes, it's a challenge, but it's a challenge we're going to have to overcome if we really think that's the right thing to do, right? We've got to study it, we've got to describe it and move forward. And frankly, it's going to happen. There are people working on that right now.
Yeah, so I think obviously more difficult, I think, with med school because the you know, everything doesn't match perfectly. But, you know, AMA has looked at it. Lots of places are doing, you know, like looking at the whole country or multiple medical schools or, you know, a sample of medical schools. So I think exactly as Dr. Promise says, you look at the differences, you address the differences up front the best you can, and then you kind of bring it all together as much as you can. It starts obviously with a very smart statistician and study designer at the beginning, but there's nothing that cannot be overcome. I think it's easier, I think, for residency stuff a little bit better because you're looking at maybe milestones or different things that you're trying to address. But I think they're adding a lot of that to the med school, so you could potentially really look at those part of it, not the difference in the curriculum, but maybe what they're achieving. And then it doesn't really matter maybe that somebody's got a longitudinal curriculum and maybe you don't, and you have, you know, an 8-week compressed curriculum for. So I really think you look at it from, you know, what you're trying to achieve rather than the differences in the curriculum. But I think I echo everything Dr. Promise said. One of the things I think that's, while you're coming up, that people often struggle with, and Dr. Promise mentioned it, is a statistician or study designer or things like that. Obviously, you might have that in your department, and great if you do. We have one. He's sitting right up front. So we're very fortunate, but other places don't. So I'd really want to really tell you, if you have not done what Dr. Promise has said, is look at your med school. Pretty much every med school needs to have a statistician, a study designer. If they don't, then they're in trouble doing metrics and a million other things. And so if you have one, try to see if they would be available to you, especially if you're not just looking at at what you're doing, but maybe across residencies or across years or across medical school years, then they might participate as well. But try to use that avenue. If not, then I would look outward to CDEM and CORD for those resources. There was a question.
Over here. Great. Thank you so much for the insight so far. I had a question about the hot topics. You mentioned one was AI, machine learning, and EMR data. From my experience, I've mostly seen this in more clinical research. You're compiling EMR data sets and applying that to outcomes. Could you speak to how this is incorporated into the medical education realm, and maybe what pearls and pitfalls you've seen with these articles and trends?
So in academic emergency medicine education training, we have not received a lot of submissions in this area. If you were able to attend the plenary session, there was a discussion yesterday using kind of EMR data. And one of the things that ACGME says about residents is giving them data to improve their performance. And so there was a discussion about using kind of time from when they sign up for a patient, when they disposition the patient, and realizing that's not totally dependent on that particular individual, but it probably gives you some idea of how efficient they're being, how do they compare with their colleagues. My sense is that, that kind of information matters a lot when you're an attending. I don't know about you guys, but my faculty, I'm the chair of emergency medicine, they get the report cards. They know if they are slow, if they're fast, if they're in the middle. And it actually causes a little competition between them because no one wants to be the one that takes too long. And I think that is the reality when you get out of residency. And so we really need to train our residents, right? How do you look at this? What ways can you be more efficient? So I think the EMR data, I think there's part of it there. Another way, and I am no expert at this, so if some of you guys know more, please chime in. There's ways at looking at how people write up their H&Ps. There's AI data that can say, gee, you spent a lot of time doing this, and really, you just need to get these key points. So I think there's opportunities there. I'm no expert on what that looks like, but I do think that we have some potential there to do research in that area.
Yeah, I think what you mentioned is fantastic. We just had our site visit not too long ago for a new residency that I'm participating in. And, one of the feedback was, do you give, your data back to your residents? And we were like, not as much as we should. So we went and looked. I mean, a ton of information is available in the EMR, and we just weren't making it available. And so we're really building ways to make it automatic and, give them feedback that they're looking for. Depending on your EMR, Epic makes it really easy to do, kind of these things, and, maybe other ones might be you have to build it in there. So I think, but you could easily study that and see, over time how that improves or improves either satisfaction or improves their performance or improves, addressing milestones in residency. But I really think for the residency stuff, it's all there, and it's prime for publishing. I really think for the med students, we have underutilized the EMR. You know, they're doing some H&Ps depending on the place, and maybe some places are doing more. Now it might be a little easier than before because, you know, CMS allows them to participate in the note. But there's a lot, I really think, from when it comes to med students and their participation in the care of the patient that can be looked at. And, you know, my background's all in med student stuff, and it, until recently, you know, their notes didn't count, so it was always bothered me.
Yeah. As we're sitting here talking, I'm thinking, wow, we could use the EMR to look at how people think about things. So if you think about it, a resident presents a case, they order labs. Do they order everything up front that really is part of their differential, or do they wait? Results come back, then they order it again. Like, that's feedback you could give someone. Like, did you really have to wait to order that study? Or could you have done it up front? I've never seen anyone look at that because all the orders are timed. So you could figure out, depending how it works at your situation, you know, maybe you have a place where somebody just puts in orders up front, so that's a moot point, you couldn't study it. But I think there's opportunity to use the EMR in very interesting ways from an educational perspective. The other study would be potentially looking at who really trains people how to efficiently use the EMR. You know, we have an overview by somebody who's, you know, in IT. And, you know, they kind of talk about this is what you do, but man, you need so much more than that to be efficient in an EMR. You need templates. You need to, you know, all of that is really important. So I think there's lots of opportunities. Hopefully I answered your question, or we answered your question.
Yeah, I would just add to that. So Nick Command from Ohio State. I mostly do medical students too. I oversee the fourth year. And the first comment I wanted to add to is Dave Way. We have an educational specialist as well. And we've actually been able to show the impact on the number of papers that come out of our group and the number of people that have been promoted. And so if you have one ask of your chair, getting somebody like that at your place that can help you with IRBs and grants and things like that, and you guys have met Dave before. The reason he's not here is they put this meeting against the Education Research Interest Group, which I don't know if you've mentioned that, but a sponsored talk didactic is up against the interest group that sponsored it. Doesn't make any sense. But as far as the EMR, we actually just had something accepted to WestGem that was a EMR playground. So I don't know if you use IHIS, there's a playground, and the students can go in there and see like sham patients. So it was a COVID case that the students would have to read a respiratory therapy note and then consult with a pharmacist and do some documentation. And I agree that that there's not much out there doing that. So I think our plan is to try to do some more with that. We also and I'd plug the MedEd portal. Like in the past, we've had somebody on the panel from the MedEd portal. That's a good place to put your curriculum. So EPA 4 is writing orders and prescriptions, and our medical school wasn't doing very well with that, so we built a curriculum in the IHIS like playground where the students would have to see a patient and then document the orders for the admission, and that was accepted at the MedEd portal. So you know, so you can actually pick curricula out of the MedEd portal and then study it and then submit it to their journals, which is a good thing to do as well. So I don't have a question.
Great suggestion, thanks.
To piggyback on
The other one for curriculum is JET-EM. So, you know, it's sponsored by CORD. So Journal of Educational Training and Emergency Medicine. It's at UC Irvine is the publisher, but it's sponsored by CORD, and they also accept curriculum. So another place, you know, in addition, MedEd portal is Medline indexed and stuff. JET-EM is moving toward that.
One thing that has always intrigued me with regard to the big data question is order cancellation rates, right? If learners are putting in orders and then those orders get canceled, it's a signal either of their own uncertainty or a correction by a more senior person. And I wonder about patterns in orders over time that might show a pattern of independent practice aside from the faculty member with whom they're working. That's something that only big data could tell us, and it would require that sort of science, but it's a super interesting question.
So, just to kind of go along what you were talking about with the notes and EMR and, about med students. So, our med students, right, smarter than we are, faster than we are, more adept at computers and all of this stuff. I mean, we should have put this stuff in med schools on steroids when it comes to this stuff. I mean, we just haven't, right? I mean, you could create an artificial world for them, and they could learn this stuff super duper fast. So, not that there's not enough money in medical education, but I really think that we could really push their learning. So we're not doing anything wrong from the stuff they're learning. I just think we don't give them all the tools to really try to maximize at their own pace. And it's hard, not that it's easy, but we leave too much of it to when they start internship and to the orientation and the first year, and I think we could have moved all of that stuff to the fourth year. I really think, I'm preaching to the choir, but I really think the fourth year med school is an underutilized year. We've been talking about it for decades, and I really think all this stuff and that's why they're talking about finishing med school in 3 years. I mean, all these schools, we're going to finish it in 3 years. Well, they're doing it because they think the fourth year is useless. I'm not an advocate for finishing med schools in 3 years. I just think we should add to the fourth year.
What if they're already competent? What if you did time-based competency medical education?
Not time-based, you did competency-based education.
Time variable. Right, that's what he's talking about.
So I've been at 2 institutions where that happens, right? I was at Duke, and pretty much it's a 3-year curriculum, and they can go on and do other stuff. And I'm at an institution now where we have a 3+3 program. You're accepted in a medical school, you do 3 years of medical school, and then you go into our residency program. It's decided within your first year. And, we're just a few years into that, but I can tell you there is absolutely no difference in the residents that we're putting out at the end and their capabilities of doing it. So,
On that topic,
Where are you cutting it down? Is it in the preclinical years or is it in the clinical time?
yeah, it's where they get almost all their elective stuff. So they get some of that, but not as much. And they have a longitudinal curriculum, so they do a little bit more than people would do typically in their first year. The kind of basic science time is just a year and a half, maybe, and then the rest, they do all the third-year clerkships and then kind of add on.
on that topic of competency-based education, I'm thinking about procedural competency in residency. The cognitive stuff kind of makes sense. You do it during simulation, you do it on shift evaluations, whatnot. Have you seen a well-designed study assessing procedural competence in residents that doesn't involve standing at the bedside watching every procedure over the course of 3 or 4 years?
You want to try? Want me to try? Okay. So I think that's a pretty loaded question, right? There are so many different procedures we're expected to do in emergency medicine. And we know that we are not good at direct observation in medicine in general, right? There was a study years ago, 95 or something like that, looking where they asked residents, how many times have you kind of been observed? And, greater than 50% of them said less than 3 times, right? We just don't do a good job. So your comment about other than watching them, I say, when do we watch them? But I think we do with procedures, right? Because in order to bill for them, you really do need to be there either for the full part or the key parts of it. So I think those procedures that are really life or death kind of things that you got to make sure you get right. We really need to observe those. Recently, there was a group that got together from all the major emergency medicine kind of professional societies to prepare a document to go to ACGME about procedure numbers. And, they really tried to find literature, and there just isn't much out there. Looks like you might have a comment. We'll go to you in just a second. But there is some literature about the number it takes to do things, but I don't think we really know the answer to that very well. And, master learning is clearly important. So I think that's an opportunity for us as researchers in medical education to try to define things better. I don't think it's an absolute number, I think number is part of it. Some things you have to do more than once. But you had a comment, I think.
Just to kind of put a shameless plug in, we actually just published in AEM ENT a couple months ago, what we call a curated collection for educators, and it was a modified Delphi where we looked actually at procedural skills training, and it's the top 5 papers that picked by both junior and senior faculty to help teaching procedural skills. And it may just be a place to start looking for literature in terms of procedural skills training. So it's in AEM
Yeah.
ENT.
As background, when ACGME originally came up with the numbers for emergency medicine, I was on the RRC. It happened right before, and I asked, where did this come from? Like, we sat around a room and kind of picked it. There was maybe 1 or 2 articles at that time.
Isn't that kind of what that paper you're referencing? Isn't that kind of what the recommendations that are just coming out kind of repeated as well?
Yeah, I think it's a little more politically heated, the most recent papers, about saying we have academic institutions, and we could kind of do this here, so we're going to increase those numbers, whereas a community play, I really think there's a lot more to it, a lot more loaded into it right now, my understanding. So that's a personal bias. I'm not speaking on behalf of anyone else. That's Susan Promise and her perspective. So.
Well, if you want to look at one procedure, William McGate and Bill McGate published a lot on mastery learning with central lines. So that's like kind of the quintessential paper that people point out. So it's mastery learning and deliberate practice on procedures. We had him come give a grand rounds at our place, and I think people are trying to replicate what they did, because actually what they showed was improvements in patient safety. So, the holy grail of education research is better patient outcomes, not better learner confidence and things like that we always shoot for. So that I would encourage you to look up that paper, because I know our procedural curriculum for our residency, they're now doing this checklist-based simulation procedures and trying to sign people off. Because just like any place, we've had guide wire stuff, and you guys have all been there, I'm sure.
Let me ask one question. So you guys heard about AEM education training, WestJam. Where are some of the other places you guys are submitting education papers? I'm just curious. I think maybe that might be some good learning from others, and I can make some recommendations. But where are you submitting your education papers?
It's interesting that you say that I'm just curious, because Curious
Yeah, that's what I was
actually has published 2 of my education papers.
Excellent. Any others, guys?
Yeah, I would say medical science educator.
That's a new
I
one.
met Peter DeJong at a meeting, and I guess this will be a shameless plug too. Like, if you guys are presenting your stuff at a meeting and the editor is there, it's a good chance to say, hey, could this find a home in your journal? And so we published one thing with them, and then the follow-up thing, and it wound up being like 3 papers. Medical Science Educator is the journal of IAMC, which is more of like a basic science educator type group, but they're trying to build up their like clinical medical student education. The other journal that I would just mention is Teaching and Learning in Medicine.
Yeah.
It's a quarterly journal, but it's the journal of the Alliance of Clinical Educators, of which CDEM is a member. I can tell you that journal's been challenging for me, because it's quarterly, and I think they have like a 10% acceptance rate, so that's a little bit more aspirational, but I would just I have gotten things in there, but it's a little bit more challenging. Did you mention there's a AAMC, there's like a list of journals that publish med-ed stuff. We can probably try to get that out. It was on a slide we gave in the years past, but.
We have multiple copies of something like that.
So I have another question for the group. How many of you are currently reviewers for a journal? I really encourage you to do that. You will learn so much by reviewing other people's papers and also seeing what the other reviewers say about that. It's a great opportunity. I'm sure you guys are looking for reviewers. We are, so if you're interested, please reach out. But I think it's a great opportunity and a good service to our professional organization. We need people to review and really kind of criticize and take a good, strong look at what's going out there for publications. I know we're drawn to a close, so I want to say thank you. Right?
I think, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I want to say thank you guys for being here and happy to answer any questions afterwards if you have them.
Yeah, I think for the reviewer thing, sorry about that, I'd encourage you, if you have a lot of time, which nobody does, then don't give them like what areas you want to review, but if you don't, then tell them you really want to review this area. That way you get a lot in the specific area that you're interested, and they'll tighten it down to what you're interested. So I don't know if it's medical student stuff, resident stuff, if it's competency, so I mean, whatever it is that you're really passionate about, if that matters. If not, otherwise you'll get a ton of review requests. Thank you very much.
Yeah.